The old map was a mess of faded lines and water damage, but it was my only guide. My grandfather had left it to me, a cryptic note scribbled on the back. Follow the weeping trail. Listen for the song. He'd spent his life searching for something in the remote forests of the Pacific Northwest. And I, a modern-day treasure hunter, was determined to finish his work. My friends had warned me against it, but the thrill of the unknown was too strong. I packed my bag and set out for a place on the map marked only as the Whispering Glen. The first few days were peaceful. The woods were quiet. The air smelled of damp earth and pine. I hiked for miles, following a barely visible trail that my grandfather had marked with small rock cairns. As I went deeper, the forest changed. The trees grew taller, their branches twisting into gnarled skeletal shapes that blocked out the sun. A strange, unnatural silence fell over the woods. I couldn't hear the rustle of leaves or the chirping of birds. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. That night, I heard it for the first time. It was a sound that made my skin crawl, a low, mournful wail, like a human crying in agony, but stretched and distorted, as if coming from a throat that wasn't quite human. It was the song my grandfather had mentioned. It sounded impossibly close, yet impossibly far away. I huddled in my tent, a hunting knife clutched in my hand, and waited for dawn. Over the next few days, the sounds got closer. I'd hear a twig snap behind me, and when I turned, there would be nothing there. I'd catch a glimpse of a tall, impossibly thin shadow moving through the trees, just at the edge of my vision. I felt a primal fear setting in, a sense of being stalked by something ancient and malevolent. It wasn't a bear or a cougar. It was something else. My grandfather's words echoed in my mind. The weeping trail will guide you, not the song will break you. I finally reached the Whispering Glen. It wasn't a glen at all, but a deep, dark cave hidden behind a waterfall. The air was thick with the smell of decay and something else, a musky, metallic odor that turned my stomach. I saw it then, on the ground, just inside the cave entrance. A small, animal skull, bleached white and perfectly preserved. It was my grandfather's signal, a small token left behind to confirm he had been there. Took it with me and ventured deeper into the darkness. The wailing grew louder, echoing off the cave walls, a chorus of tormented screams. I could no longer tell where it was coming from. It was everywhere. Panic seized me. I needed to get out. I turned and ran, the flashlight beam dancing wildly ahead of me. As I neared the entrance, I felt a bone-shaking presence right behind me. A low growl, deep and guttural, rumbled through the cave. I risked a glance over my shoulder and saw it. It was a nightmare made of sticks and bone, a towering, gaunt figure with long, grasping arms and a monstrous face, its mouth a jagged wound of teeth. Kay's eyes glowed with a feral hunger. The creature didn't have to run. Kay glided, covering a terrifying amount of distance with each step, let out a blood-curdling shriek, a sound that felt like it was tearing my very soul apart. I stumbled and fell, dropping the hunting knife. It was over. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the creature froze, looked at me, its gaze burning into me, and then it turned and slowly melted back into the shadows. I lay there for a long time. The silence, a deafening roar after the monster's shriek. Slowly crawled to my feet and made my way out of the cave, back into the forest. I was found 3 days later, wandering aimlessly on a logging road, delirious and covered in mud. I had no memory of how I got there, and the skull from the cave was gone. But when the doctors looked at me, they couldn't explain the small, almost imperceptible black mark on the back of my neck. It was no bigger than a grain of rice, but it was there, and no one knew why. I never spoke again, not a single word. My body was back in the world, but my mind was still in that cave, listening to the song. Every night, I dream of that creature. And in my dreams, it is still singing. I spent 3 months in the hospital, and I never spoke a word. The doctors ran every test imaginable. They said my vitals were normal, that my brain scans showed no damage. But they couldn't explain the small black mark on the back of my neck, or the way my eyes would constantly dart to the shadows, as if seeing something no one else could. My family tried to get me to write, to communicate, but I couldn't. The memory of that Wendigo's shriek was a constant echo in my mind. A mental torment that made all other thoughts and words impossible. When they released me, I went to live with my parents in a small, remote cabin near the woods. Ironically, I couldn't face the outside world. The fear was a living thing inside me, a parasite. My days were a blur of staring out the window, looking at the trees. The woods that had once been my sanctuary were now a cage. I felt a constant, gnawing hunger, but it wasn't for food. It was a deeper, more profound emptiness. I would eat, and then an hour later, I would feel as if I hadn't eaten in days. The doctors wrote it off as a symptom of my trauma, but I knew it was something else. It was part of the sickness that had been passed to me in the cave. The dreams began a few weeks after I got home, where they were always the same. I would be back in that cave, the Wendigo standing over me. But instead of attacking, it would just stand there, its eyes burning into me. Its mouth, a jagged wound of teeth, would open, and a voice would echo in my mind. A voice that was not a sound, but a thought. We are one now. One day, I was sitting by the window, watching the sunset cast long shadows through the trees, when I heard a familiar sound. It was faint, almost a memory, but it was there, was the low, mournful wail of the Wendigo. I squeezed my eyes shut, a silent scream of denial trapped in my throat. It was impossible. It couldn't be here. The sound was too faint. My mind was playing tricks on me. But then, the trees, just at the edge of the woods, started to creak and groan. They were swaying, but there was no wind. They were bending, twisting, and cracking as if an unseen hand was pushing them. The ground began to vibrate with a low, rumbling hum. I put my hands over my ears, but the sound was not in the air. It was inside my head. The wail was a whisper, but it was a whisper that was getting louder and louder and louder. It was coming from everywhere at once. It was the chorus of the Wendigo's song, and it was inside my mind. It was a link, a connection. The Wendigo hadn't just spared me, it had marked me. It was now a part of me, and I was a part of it. It was calling to me, drawing me back to the woods. The constant hunger I felt was not my own. It was a hunger that came from the Wendigo, a deep, consuming craving that it had passed to me. The silent terror I lived with was not my own, but a part of the Wendigo's endless torment. I stood up and walked to the door. My parents shouted at me, asking me to stop, to stay inside, but their voices were distant, muted. The Wendigo's song was the only thing I could hear. It wasn't just a physical encounter I had survived. It was an invasion. It was a transformation. I opened the door and walked out into the cold air. The Wendigo's song was calling, and I, its silent, broken vessel, had no choice but to follow.